Hi, my name is Elizabeth Mixtall, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about international economics and how I think some of the models that we use to try and understand trade and the relationship between poor countries and rich countries can often be misleading because they don't take into account a lot of the historical context regarding colonialism and the effects of neoliberal capitalism. Okay, so beginning, I want to first address, before I get into this, I want to describe what an economic model is. Obviously, this is something everyone in this class is familiar with, but basically, models are a simplified version of reality that allow us to observe, understand, and make predictions about economic behaviors. So going forward, I want to make it perfectly clear that I am not critiquing the use of assumptions. The use of assumptions is inherent in any economic model because the point of it, as previously said, is to break it down into the bare essentials and to try and figure out patterns of human behavior relating to the economy. Going forward, I'm going to address how the use of misleading data can often create these false assumptions that are embedded into a lot of the models that we see.
The United Nations also presents this rosy narrative to give the impression that the global economy is on the right track. It may be for the global north, but not so much for the global south. They began this data analysis in 2000 with their Millennium Development Goals. They do this manipulation in several ways. First, they changed the measurement of poverty from absolute numbers to proportional numbers, allowing for the appearance of less suffering over time due to population growth. The moral calculus of this is appalling because it implies that even if there is more and more suffering throughout the world, so long as the population of less impoverished people keeps growing, the increasing number of poor people can be seen as decreasing. Second, to manipulate the data further, the UN moved the starting point from 2000, when they actually began doing things, to 1990 to take advantage of gains made prior to when they even started the program. They did this to take credit for massive improvement on poverty in China during the 90s.
I've been told over and over again by the World Bank as well as the United Nations that the data reveals that the global poverty rate is decreased. Many independent international economists have been very critical of these claims. In Jason Heigel's The Divide, he talks a little bit about how the original metric that established the international poverty line was created in 1981 and since then has not changed. In 1981, the IPL was $1.90 per day. Using modern statistics, many economists would argue that around $5 per day is a much more accurate number to describe the IPL. Today, approximately 60% of the world's population, about 4.3 billion people, actually live on less than $5 US per day. If you make less than $5 per day, you are not likely to live to the global life expectancy. A lot of the data that is used in the creation of these models does come from places like the World Bank and the United Nations. Now, this is not to say that we should dismiss these models, but it's rather to say that we should be very critical of where we get our data from and understand that organizations like the World Bank and the United Nations have an incentive to provide data that can be misleading when it comes to development of the global. So now let's go over some of the assumptions that we've learned about in the Ricardian model, the Heckscher-Ohlin model, and the specific factors model. First, in the Ricardian model, I want to look at two specific assumptions made in order for this model to be viable. This first assumption, assumption number 3, says that perfect competition in output and factor labor markets must take place. And also, number 6 says that there must be full employment of labor, aka no unemployment. Now, in the trade in specific factors model, I want to look at number 3, which is that there's perfect competition among both factors of output and market. And finally, in the Hershker-Ohlin model, I want to look at numbers 6 and 10. Let's address the perfect competition assumption. What is perfect competition? I'm sure everyone's heard of this in their intro Econ courses, but basically perfect competition is a market in which the buyers and sellers are so numerous and well informed that there are no elements of a monopoly. This also means that the market price of commodities is beyond the control of individual buyers and sellers. Though having a background in world history might be useful to understanding the context of slavery, colonialism, and neoliberalism, it's not necessary in order to understand the basic functions of monopoly. Northern countries in general, industrialized sooner than their exploited colonies. Therefore, they were able to create monopolies in said industries. This is the reason why you will see cars are being sold from northern industrialized countries, but not from southern countries. This assumption that perfect competition exists is not true if there is already an entire market monopolized by countries. Created a global economy incompatible with perfect competition. There is no reason for a developing country to try and industrialize because all of the marketplaces for industrialized skilled labor have already been monopolized. Furthermore, they don't have a labor force capable of doing that because the majority of the labor for the past multiple generations has all been focused on the production and exportation of raw materials. I want to touch on the legacy of the relationship between the colonizer and colonized countries. While these colonizer countries were industrializing and developing in skilled labor markets and monopolizing said markets, they were purchasing raw materials from their colonized countries and selling them back the finished goods. This relationship still exists today. Through our global economy, we have made southern countries dependent on the skilled labor from northern industrialized countries. Because of that, we have prevented industrialization and in turn prevented an equality of technology across borders. The technology assumption is inherently false. Finally, let's address the assumption about factors of production moving across countries. Specifically, I'm going to focus on the factor of labor. In the past decade or so, we've had a lot of conversations about the effects of globalization. One of these key effects has been the exportation of labor. In the Heckscher-Ohlin model, it talks a lot about how specific factors of production, labor, and capital either benefit or suffer from international trade. However, this model is dependent on the fact that factors cannot move between countries. This is obviously not based in reality due to international differences in the way that labor markets are regulated. It has created an incentive for northern industrialized countries to export unskilled labor. What does this mean? It means that we have seen an increase of sweatshops, which their main exports are goods to northern countries. It's in India where you see a large number of phone banks, and it's in Southeast Asia where you'll see a number of... In conclusion, there is nothing wrong with economic models and the use of assumptions in order to develop the viability of these models. However, it is important to be very critical about the data that we use, as well as how some of these assumptions might overlook the context of colonialism and our neoliberal modern global system.